Welcome to my channel, The World of Science Fiction. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Kalen existed in a world of regulated gray. The walls of the Xylo's correctional mandate were gray, cast from a ferroconcrete composite that drank light and offered no reflection. The sky, viewed through the triple-paned, shatterproof windows of his observation post, was a perpetual smear of gray dust kicked up from the moon's silicate surface. Even his uniform was gray, a practical, joyless fabric designed to show no stains and offer no comfort. He had once been a soldier, a man who dealt in the vibrant, terrible colors of conflict. Now, as a warden for the hegemony, his life had been bleached of all saturation, leaving only the endless, numbing spectrum of duty. His post overlooked Containment Block Zeta, the highest security sector on Xylos. It housed a single occupant, Specimen 734. The designation was clinical, sterile, designed to strip away any notion of personhood. The hegemony was very good at that. They had stripped it from him during the Silicate Wars, reforging him from a man into a weapon, and now they were doing it to whatever lived behind the shimmering energy field of Cell 1. Kalen's job was simple. He watched. He logged biometric fluctuations, energy output, and any deviation from the established baseline of its existence. He was a glorified zookeeper for a creature the hegemony both feared and coveted. He had never seen it clearly. The containment field distorted light, rendering the occupant a shimmering, vaguely bipedal silhouette of fractured color. The official reports described it as a native Xylosian, a silicon-based life form of immense potential and equal danger. They called it a crystalline predator, a geological anomaly with a rudimentary consciousness. The logs were filled with accounts of its destructive power, tales of how it had shattered mining equipment and killed the first survey teams with focused sonic pulses. It was, according to hegemony doctrine, a monster, but Kalen had watched it for 612 rotations. He had seen it stand perfectly still for days, a statue of living crystal catching the weak light, filtering into its cell. He had seen it trace intricate patterns on the floor with a single, elongated digit, patterns that seemed too complex, too deliberate, for a mere beast. He had listened to the low, resonant hum it sometimes emitted, a sound that felt less like a growl and more like a lament. He saw not a monster, but a prisoner, and in its profound isolation, he saw a distorted reflection of his own. The tests were the worst part of his duty. Scientists in sterile white coats would arrive from the orbital station, their faces hidden behind reflective visors. They would subject Specimen 734 to all manner of stimuli: extreme temperatures, agonizing frequencies, galvanic shocks. They called it compatibility testing, a euphemism for torture designed to map its resilience and probe its weaknesses. Kalen's role was to monitor the creature's vital signs and ensure the containment field held. He was a passive accomplice, his hands gripping the console as the creature's energy signature spiked into the red, its silent pain displayed as a jagged line on his screen. Today was a mating test, the most deceptively named of all the protocols. It had nothing to do with procreation. It was an attempt to forcibly bond the creature's biology with hegemony cybernetics, to see if it could be integrated, controlled, and turned into a living weapon. The scientists activated a series of emitters that flooded the cell with invasive nanites. On Kalen's display, the silhouette convulsed. The low hum became a sharp, piercing keen of ultrasonic agony. Its crystalline structure began to fluoresce with sickening colors, a fever dream of pain made visible. Kalen's jaw tightened. He had seen men break in the war. He had seen ships burn against the void. But this cold, calculated cruelty, inflicted upon a creature that could not even scream in a language its tormentors would recognize, felt uniquely vile. The protocols were clear. He was to observe, to record, and to report any containment fluctuations. His orders were absolute. His pension, his quiet, empty life after this forsaken tour, depended on his obedience. The creature thrashed, striking the energy field. A shower of sparks erupted, and the lights in the observation post flickered. An alarm blared, a single, insistent tone. Containment integrity at 92%, the console's synthetic voice announced. The scientists, visible on a secondary monitor, did not stop the procedure. They merely intensified the nanite swarm. Kalen saw the jagged line on his monitor plummet. Life signs critical. Something inside him, a piece of the man he was before the wars and the gray uniforms, snapped. It was not a grand decision. It was a flicker, an impulse born of 1,000 days of silent observation and a sudden, unbearable weight of complicity. His hand moved, almost of its own accord, his fingers flying across the console. He input his authorization code, and then a secondary command, one reserved for catastrophic system failure. He overrode the experiment protocol. He triggered an emergency containment flush. The nanite emitters shut down. The agonizing frequencies ceased. A wave of neutralizing gas filled the cell, rendering the remaining nanites inert. On his screen, the silhouette of specimen 734 collapsed to the floor, its violet fluorescing dimming to a faint, exhausted glow. The jagged line of its life sign stabilized, weak but steady. Kalen let out a breath he did not realize he had been holding. He had just committed an act of profound insubordination. He had broken protocol. He went further, accessing the cell's nutrient dispenser, a function he was never to use without direct authorization. He diverted a small portion of his own water ration, a full liter of purified, precious water. A small port opened in the cell wall, and the water trickled onto the floor near the collapsed form. It was a meaningless gesture, an unplanned act of compassion that would surely cost him everything. He watched as the creature stirred, one crystalline limb extending slowly, hesitantly, toward the small pool of water. It touched the liquid, and for the first time in 612 rotations, the low hum that emanated from it was not one of pain or sorrow. It was a note of something akin to gratitude. That single note was the sound of his old life ending. The alarm shifted from a warning tone to a full-scale security alert. Red lights began to flash across his console, washing the gray room in the color of blood. Unauthorized protocol override. Warden Kalen, stand down and await disciplinary action. The synthetic voice commanded, its tone now devoid of its earlier neutrality. On his other monitor, he saw armored figures, his former colleagues, his fellow wardens, storming the science lab. The scientists were gesticulating wildly, pointing toward his observation post. Warden Corvus's face appeared on his primary screen. Corvus, a man whose ambition was as sharp and cruel as the knife he kept sheathed at his belt. His eyes, small and dark, burned with a triumphant malice. Kalen, he snarled, his voice a low growl of static. You have lost your mind. Surrender now. Administrator Valerius is on his way from orbit. You have no idea the trouble you are in. Kalen knew exactly the trouble he was in. He would be stripped of his rank, court-martialed, and likely thrown into one of these very cells. He looked from Corvus's snarling face to the monitor showing the creature, now weakly drawing the water toward itself. He had made his choice in a moment of instinct, but now, with the consequences bearing down on him, he had to see it through. His life of quiet desperation was over. What replaced it would be loud and almost certainly short. He severed the connection to Corvus. His fingers moved with a speed and precision he had not summoned since the war, slicing through firewalls, rerouting power, and sealing the blast doors to his observation post and the corridor leading to containment block Zeta. He was buying himself minutes, nothing more. He turned his attention to the cell. He had one chance, one insane, desperate gamble. His ally, if it could be called that, was the very thing he had been charged with guarding. He initiated the final, most forbidden command on his console, emergency release. Containment field disengaged, the system announced, almost conversationally. The shimmering barrier of light that had imprisoned specimen 734 for years collapsed with a soft hiss. The air in the observation post grew heavy, charged with ozone and an unfamiliar, mineral scent, like a storm breaking deep underground. For the first time, Kalen saw the creature without distortion. It was taller than he had imagined, slender and elegant in a way the reports had never conveyed. Its body was a lattice of interlocking, semi-translucent crystals, ranging in color from smoky quartz to deep amethyst. It was not a predator of flesh and bone, but a living geological formation, both beautiful and terrifyingly alien. It rose to its full height, its multifaceted head tilting as it regarded him through the reinforced window of his post. There were no eyes he could recognize, but he felt its gaze, an intense, intelligent scrutiny that seemed to bore right through him. The distant sound of a plasma torch cutting through the blast door reached him. Corvus was coming. Kalen looked at the Xylosian. He had no way to communicate, no way to explain his actions. He could only hope that his act of mercy had purchased him a moment's trust. He keyed open the door to his own post, stepping out into the sterile corridor that separated him from the now-open cell. He held his hands out, palms open and empty. The universal gesture of peace he hoped transcended species. The Xylosian took a step forward. The floor plates groaned under its weight. It was powerful. He could feel it, a latent energy humming just beneath its crystalline skin. It moved not with the lumbering gait of a beast, but with a strange, fluid grace. It stopped a few meters away from him, its silence more intimidating than any roar. The sound of the plasma torch grew louder, closer. They were cornered. The corridor was a kill box, a straight line with no cover. Behind them, the only way out was another sealed blast door leading to the maintenance tunnels. Kalen knew he could not cut through it in time. He drew his sidearm, a standard hegemony pulse pistol. It felt like a child's toy against the threat of a fully armed security team. He glanced at the Xylosian. Its head was cocked, listening to the sounds of its approaching captors. The blast door down the hall slagged, then burst inward with a shriek of tortured metal. Corvus stood in the breach, flanked by 6 guards in full combat armor, their pulse rifles leveled. "Traitor," Corvus spat, his face a mask of fury. "You and your pet will be put down." Kalen raised his pistol, knowing it was futile. He was prepared to die. He had made his stand. But before Corvus could give the order to fire, the Xylosian moved. It stepped in front of Kalen, shielding him with its body. It raised its long, crystalline arms, and the air itself seemed to vibrate. The low hum it emitted grew in pitch and volume, escalating into a deafening shriek that made Kalen's teeth ache. A wave of pure sonic force, visible as a ripple in the air, erupted from the creature. It struck the security team head-on. The guards were thrown back like dolls, their armor denting, their helmet visors cracking. Corvus, better braced, managed to stay on his feet, but his rifle flew from his hands. The lights in the corridor exploded in a shower of sparks, plunging them into a flickering emergency red. The Xylosian did not press the attack. Instead, it turned and struck the sealed blast door behind them, not with sound, but with a physical blow of impossible strength. Its fist, a collection of sharp, obsidian-like crystals, punched through the meter-thick alloy as if it were parchment. It tore the metal apart, creating a jagged opening just large enough to squeeze through. It looked at Kalen, a clear and unmistakable invitation. He did not hesitate. He scrambled through the opening, the torn metal snagging on his uniform. The Xylosian followed, its lithe form slipping through the gap with ease. Behind them, Corvus was screaming orders, the surviving guards beginning to stir. They were in the maintenance tunnels now, a labyrinth of pipes and conduits that snaked through the prison's foundations. It was dark, cramped, and smelled of ozone and recycled air. But it was a path to escape. For the first time, they were not warden and prisoner. They were allies. They moved through the suffocating darkness of the underbelly, guided only by the faint, internal luminescence of the Xylosian. It cast a soft, purple glow, just enough for Kalen to see the path ahead. The sounds of pursuit were a constant, echoing presence behind them. The clang of magboots on metal grating, the shouted commands of Corvus's teams. Kalen's military training took over. He led them through junctions he knew from schematics, taking paths that were structurally unsound or led through high-energy conduits, anything to slow their pursuers. The Xylosian, which he now thought of by the designation Lyra from a fragment of an old, redacted survey report, moved with a silent, unnerving confidence. It seemed to sense the structural weaknesses in their path, bracing a crumbling wall with one hand or pointing with a slender digit toward a conduit that hummed with lethal energy. Their communication was wordless, a language of gesture and shared urgency. He provided the tactical knowledge. It provided the raw power and an instinctual understanding of the environment. They reached a primary sewer junction, a vast, cylindrical chamber where torrents of waste fluid cascaded down into a churning, chemical-laced abyss. The only way across was a narrow maintenance catwalk, rusted and slick. As they started across, spotlights flooded the chamber from the tunnel they had just exited. Corvus and his team were there, rifles raised. Nowhere left to run. Kalen, his voice boomed over a loudspeaker, distorted and metallic. Pulse rifle fire stitched the air around them. Bolts of plasma impacted the catwalk, sending molten metal spraying into the air. Kalen pushed Lyra forward. "Go," he yelled, the first word he had spoken to it. He dropped to one knee, returning fire with his pistol, laying down suppressing shots that were more of a distraction than a real threat. A plasma bolt seared past his head, singing the fabric of his collar. Another struck the catwalk just ahead of him, vaporizing a section of the railing. He lost his footing, his legs slipping off the edge. For a moment, he dangled over the abyss, his fingers scrabbling for purchase on the slick metal. The chemical stench of the waste below filled his nostrils. He was going to fall. He was going to die in this stinking hole. But then, a hand, cool and hard as marble, closed around his wrist. It was Lyra. It had turned back for him. With an effortless pull, it hauled him back onto the catwalk, his entire body weight seeming like nothing to it. This was the moment the bond was truly forged. Not in the chaos of the initial escape, but here, in this deliberate act of mutual protection. It had saved him. He owed it his life. Lyra then turned to face their pursuers. It did not use sound this time. Instead, the crystals along its spine began to glow with an intense, white light. It gathered the ambient light from the spotlights, drawing it in, focusing it. It unleashed a blinding pulse, a miniature sun that bleached all color from the world and left Kalen seeing spots even with his eyes squeezed shut. The flash was followed by the screams of the guards and the clatter of dropped rifles. When Kalen's vision cleared, Corvus and his team were writhing on the ground, hands clapped over their helmet visors, temporarily blinded. It had bought them the time they needed. They scrambled the rest of the way across the catwalk and plunged into another service tunnel, leaving the sounds of chaos and confusion behind them. They finally emerged from the prison's infrastructure through an effluent pipe, spilling out onto the harsh, open surface of Xylos. The landscape was a nightmare of shattered glass and razor-sharp silicate dunes under the perpetual twilight of the gas giant the moon orbited. The wind was a physical force, a constant abrasive whisper that carried fine, sharp particles of dust. The gray of the prison was replaced by 1,000 shades of violet, black, and shimmering silver. It was beautiful in its own lethal way. Their journey truly began. They traveled for days, Kalen's survival skills pushed to their limit. He rationed the nutrient packs he had managed to grab, but water was the real challenge. The moon was arid, seemingly lifeless. Yet Lyra seemed to know the land. It would lead him to fissures in the rock where pockets of briny, but drinkable, water had condensed. In return, he taught it how to navigate by the stars, how to use the terrain for cover from the hegemony search patrols whose ships now scarred the alien sky. During the brutal days, they sheltered from the silicate storms in deep, resonant caves. The wind howling over the cave mouths created complex, harmonic tones that made the very rock sing. It was in one of these caves that Lyra first truly communicated with him. It placed one of its crystalline hands on the cave wall and the other on Kalen's temple. His mind was flooded, not with words, but with images, emotions, and pure, undiluted knowledge. He saw Xylos not as a barren moon, but as a single, living organism. He saw the Xylosians, Lyra's people, not as individual creatures, but as extensions of the planet's own consciousness, its nerve endings, its senses. They were the guardians of the heart of Xylos, a vast, sentient crystal lattice deep within the moon's core. He saw the arrival of the hegemony, their drills and mining lasers tearing into the living skin of the planet, causing unimaginable pain. He saw the truth of the mating test. The hegemony was not trying to create a weapon. They were trying to sever the Xylosians' psychic connection to the planetary core, to lobotomize them, rendering them inert so the mining could proceed without resistance. They were committing genocide on a scale he could barely comprehend, not just killing a people, but murdering a world. And he learned the most damning secret of all. The hegemony's presence here was a violation of its own foundational laws. An ancient treaty, signed after the Unification Wars, had designated worlds with sentient geological life as sacrosanct, forever off-limits. The administrator, Valerius, was not just a tyrant. He was a criminal, hiding his crimes on a forgotten moon at the edge of explored space. The flood of information left him reeling, breathless. The hegemony he had served, the institution for which he had fought and bled, was built on a foundation of lies and atrocity. His disillusionment curdled into a cold, hard rage. He looked at Lyra, whose people were being systematically exterminated, and he finally understood. This was not about his escape anymore. This was a war for the soul of a world. In the quiet aftermath of the revelation, a different kind of understanding passed between them. Kalen sat nursing a fresh cut on his arm, a long gash from a fall among the razor rocks. The wound was a stark red line against his pale skin. Lyra watched him, its multifaceted head tilted. It then extended one of its own arms, turning it so the faint cave light caught a flaw in its crystalline structure. It was a deep, spiderwebbing fracture near its shoulder, a permanent scar that glowed with a faint, sickly light. It was where the scientist's probes had been most invasive. He reached out, his fingers tracing the edges of the fracture. The crystal was cool to the touch, but he could feel a faint, dissonant vibration from the damaged area, a lingering echo of pain. Lyra, in turn, extended a single digit and gently touched the scar on his forearm from the silicate wars, a puckered, ugly mark from a shrapnel wound that had nearly cost him his arm. In that moment, they were no longer human and alien, warden and prisoner. They were survivors, two scarred veterans of different wars, fought against the same relentless, consuming machine. The fragile piece of their journey was shattered when Administrator Valerius arrived in system. His flagship, the Indomitable, a vessel of war and oppression, took up a menacing position in high orbit. Valerius was a man who believed in overwhelming force. He did not dispatch search parties, he deployed an army. Hunter-killer squadrons, led by a vengeful and newly promoted Commander Corvus, swept the surface. Legions of chrome-plated security mechs were dropped from low orbit, their methodical, stomping advance an inexorable tide of steel. Kalen and Lyra were flushed from the highlands, forced into a series of desperate running battles through canyons of black glass and petrified forests of crystalline flora. Kalen's skills, honed in the asymmetrical warfare of the outer colonies, were formidable. He set traps using the unstable geology, creating rockslides that crushed entire squads of mechs. He used the reflective properties of the canyons to create ghost images, sending Corvus's forces on wild goose chases. Lyra, now fighting for its home, was magnificent and terrible. It moved like a phantom through the crystalline landscape, a part of the terrain itself. It toppled rock spires onto armored columns, its sonic pulses shattering mech optics and disabling their targeting systems. Together, they were a potent force, a ghost, and a phantom haunting Valerius's invasion. They bled his forces, defied his control, and became a symbol of resistance to the silent, watching world mind beneath their feet. But it was not enough. For every mech they destroyed, 10 more took its place. For every squad they evaded, a new one was deployed with more advanced tracking equipment. Kalen saw the cold, brutal arithmetic of the situation. They were winning battles, but losing the war. The true nature of their unwinnable conflict became clear when the Indomitable began deploying the components of an orbital bombardment platform. Valerius was done hunting. He was preparing to sterilize the moon's surface, to crack it open like a nut to get to the prize within, even if it meant destroying everything. Desperate, they retreated deep underground, following a path that Lyra seemed to know by instinct, a path that resonated with a deep, powerful hum. They journeyed into the heart of Xylos, into a cavern so vast it had its own atmosphere, its own faint weather. The ceiling was a galaxy of glowing crystals, and at its center was the heart itself, a single, mountain-sized crystal that pulsed with a soft, internal light, the lifeblood and consciousness of the entire moon. Here, Lyra showed him the final, terrible truth. It projected one last vision into his mind. A way to save Xylos. Not a plan for victory, but for preservation. The heart could be shielded, made permanently invulnerable to the hegemony's weapons and drills. An ancient defense mechanism could be activated, a harmonic shield that would encompass the entire moon. But the activation required a fusion, a bridge between the biological and the technological, between Xylosian and the outside world. The vision was terrifyingly specific. A Xylosian, a guardian, had to merge with the heart, becoming its new, permanent consciousness, its living will. Lyra would be this guardian. But the process could not be initiated from within. It required an external catalyst, someone to interface with the ancient control mechanism, a console of living rock that predated humanity. This initiator would have to channel the immense energy of the activation. The process would be fatal. The initiator's mind and body would be consumed, their consciousness unspooled and woven into the very fabric of the shield as its regulatory system. The choice was clear. The sacrifice was absolute. Kalen stood before the ancient, monolithic console, the hum of the great heart filling the air around him. The solution was there, a path to save this world and its people. But the cost was his own existence. He stepped back, turning away from the altar of stone and light, and walked to the edge of the cavern. He looked up at the distant, glittering ceiling, a cosmos in miniature. He thought of his life, a childhood on a forgotten agri-world, a youth spent fighting a corporation's war, and an adulthood spent in the gray service of a corrupt hegemony. He had no family, no home to return to. His past was a litany of orders followed and regrets buried. He had lived his life as a tool, a cog in a machine he now knew to be monstrous. What had it all been for? His existence was a flat line, a slow march toward a meaningless end in some forgotten corner of the galaxy. Here, for the first time since he was a boy, he had a choice that mattered. A choice that was not about following orders or surviving another day. It was a choice to create something, to protect something, to give his life, and therefore his death, a meaning that would echo long after he was gone. He could run, perhaps escape, and live out his days as a fugitive, always looking over his shoulder. Or he could stand his ground, here, at the center of everything, and become something more than a man. He could become a shield, a guardian, a treaty made of flesh and spirit. He looked over at Lyra, who stood silently by the heart, awaiting his decision. It offered no persuasion, no pressure. The choice had to be his. In its dignified silence, he saw a profound respect for his sacrifice and a shared sorrow for its necessity. His cynicism, the hard shell he had built around himself for years, finally cracked and fell away. He was not just saving an alien world. He was saving that small part of himself that had reached out with a cup of water, the part that still believed in something more than survival. He walked back to the console. He reached into his tunic and pulled out his hegemony identification tags, two small, gray metal plates that bore his name and number. They felt heavy, like the anchor that had chained him to his past. He held them up for a moment. Then, with a quiet, deliberate motion, he tore the chain from his neck. He let the tags fall to the crystalline floor, the soft clatter of final, definitive severing of his old allegiance. He was Warden Kalen no more. He looked at Lyra and gave a single, solemn nod. An understanding passed between them, deeper than any words. This was his commitment. This was his acceptance. Lyra raised one hand and touched its own chest, a gesture of profound respect. It then turned and walked toward the pulsating heart, its form beginning to shimmer, preparing for its own transformation. Kalen placed his hands on the cool, smooth surface of the control console. He was ready. The tremors started almost immediately. Distant, percussive shocks that vibrated through the floor. The hegemony had found them. Valerius was coming. Kalen could hear the grinding sounds of heavy drills boring through the rock far above, and the high-pitched whine of troop transports descending into the outer caverns. Their final stand would be a race against time. Lyra moved to the base of the heart, placing its palms against the great crystal surface. Light arced between them, and Lyra's physical form began to lose its sharp definition, its crystalline body becoming translucent, ethereal, slowly merging with the living mountain of light. It was a painful, beautiful process of dissolution. Kalen knew he had to give it time. He had to hold the line. The first breach came from a side tunnel. A squad of Corvus's elite guards blasted their way through, their armor gleaming in the cavern's soft light. Kalen grabbed the pulse rifle from a fallen guard he had dispatched on their way in. He took cover behind a crystalline outcrop and opened fire. His shots were precise, aimed at joints and visors. He was a soldier again, fighting not for a flag or a paycheck, but for a world. But they were too many. They advanced under covering fire, a relentless wave of disciplined violence. Just as they were about to overrun his position, a section of the cavern's ceiling exploded inward. But it was not more of Corvus's troops. It was Prefect Orin, Kalen's old superior, and a handful of loyalist wardens. Orin, a gruff, by-the-book officer, had clearly seen enough of Valerius's madness to choose a side. "Go, Kalen!" Orin yelled, his face grim as he and his men laid down a wall of fire, creating a desperate, heroic diversion. "Do what you have to do." Kalen did not waste the chance Orin's sacrifice had bought him. He sprinted back to the console as the sounds of a furious firefight echoed behind him. He could see Corvus himself, his face contorted with rage, breaking through the line, charging toward him. There was no more time. "Now," he whispered, to Lyra, to the world, to himself. He pressed his hands firmly against the console and pushed his own will, his own consciousness, into the ancient machine. The universe dissolved into pure, white, agonizing light. The energy of the heart of Xylos surged into him, a dam breaking, a star being born. It was not a gentle process of ascension. It was a violent, elemental deconstruction. Every cell in his body screamed as it was torn apart, its matter converted into raw energy. His memories flashed before him not as a gentle stream, but as a chaotic explosion. The smell of soil on his homeworld, the face of his first drill instructor, the terrifying beauty of a burning starship, the silent vigil in his gray observation post, the feel of Lyra's crystalline hand on his. His consciousness expanded, stretched thin across an impossible distance. He was no longer a man in a cave. He was the cave. He was the moon. He could feel every grain of silicate sand on the surface, every tectonic plate grinding deep below. He felt the hegemony forces like a virus, a poison on the skin of the world. He felt Lyra, no longer a separate being but a vast, calm intelligence at the core, a guiding will that intertwined with his own. She was the soul, and he had become the shield. Corvus reached the console, his hand outstretched to pull Kalen away, but he was too late. Kalen's physical form was already gone, dissolved into a man-shaped silhouette of pure, shimmering light. With a final, silent act of will, Kalen completed the circuit. A wave of energy erupted from the heart of Xylos. It was not an explosion of force, but a wave of perfect, resonant harmony. It swept through the cavern, through the crust of the moon, and out into space. It was utterly harmless to living, biological tissue, but to the complex circuitry of the hegemony's war machine, it was a death knell. In the cavern, Corvus's rifle went dead in his hands. The lights on his armor flickered and died. The firefight behind him ended in an abrupt, stunned silence as every weapon, every piece of technology, was rendered inert. On the surface, the legions of mechs froze in place, becoming an army of lifeless metal statues. In the sky, the transports fell, their engines silenced, crashing into the silicate dunes. And in orbit, the mighty Indomitable went dark, its systems fried, its bombardment platform nothing more than a new piece of dead space junk. The war was over, not with a bang, but with a profound and absolute silence. Administrator Valerius, stranded on his dead flagship, was left powerless, a tyrant with no kingdom. The invasion was broken in a single, silent instant. 10 years passed. Xylos was no longer a forgotten prison moon. It was a protected world, a sovereign power under the new Xylosian Treaty, an agreement brokered by a shamed and reformed Galactic Council. The hegemony, exposed by Prefect Orin's testimony and the logs Kalen had leaked before his final act, had collapsed under the weight of its own corruption. Valerius and Corvus had been tried and imprisoned for their crimes against sentient life. A new era of cautious cooperation had begun. Prefect Orin, now Ambassador Orin, stood on a ridge overlooking a newly green valley. Terraforming, a joint human-Xylosian project, was slowly bringing life back to the moon's surface. In the valley below, a new generation of Xylosians, shimmering and graceful, moved among groves of strange, crystalline trees. They were no longer prisoners. They were a people, free on their own world. He looked up. The sky was no longer a dusty gray. It was a deep, clear violet. And if you looked closely, you could see it. A faint, ethereal shimmer in the upper atmosphere, a barely there curtain of soft, golden light that pulsed with a slow, steady rhythm, like a sleeping heart. The Xylosians called it Kalen's watch, the shield, the eternal, silent guardian of their world. Orin walked to a small monument that had been erected at the entrance to the great cavern, the place now considered the most sacred ground on Xylos. It was a simple plinth of polished obsidian, and on it, inscribed in both human script and the geometric language of the Xylosians, were a few simple words. It did not say hero or savior. It did not speak of his sacrifice or his bravery. It said only, Warden Kalen. He upheld the treaty. Orin reached out and placed a hand on the cold stone. He thought of the cynical, disillusioned man he had once known, a man lost in the gray emptiness of his duty. He had found his purpose not in following orders, but in defying them. He had failed the hegemony's cruel test, and in doing so, had passed a much greater one. He had not married a person, but a cause, a world, and his legacy was written in the peaceful sky above. The cost had been everything, but the peace he had purchased was absolute. And in the silent, shimmering light of the watch, his sacrifice was not forgotten. It was eternal,